Hi and welcome back to Read No Grow. My name's Hayden and this week's book is How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. Now, even though this is an oldie, I think it's a goodie, and it was written in 1948, and even though it's a bit outdated, there are still things that really apply today. And Dale started off in poverty in Missouri, but then rose to fame and fortune by doing public speaking, and he's written books such as How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I really enjoyed this book because it was very anecdotal and it was very conversational and it was really easy to read. And Dale starts off by saying that he's not trying to reinvent the wheel by writing this book, he's just trying to kick you in the shins into action. And there's a quote saying that most of our trouble isn't ignorance, it's inaction. One of the first chapters is called Tight Compartments, and I sort of liken it to, you know, that scene in Titanic when the ship's just been hit and the engineer's sort of looking at the blueprint and is looking at the watertight compartments and trying to figure out how many the ship can withstand before the ship sinks. If you could compare the watertight compartments of the ship to the tight compartments of your life, that could maybe help you manage your worries. Because if you're already thinking about yesterday's worries, today's worries, and tomorrow's worries, it can just be a bit overwhelming and you can feel like you're sinking. But if you just concentrated on what you need to worry about today, that can potentially help you stay afloat. So I think this technique is really good if you're struggling through grief. Like when I think back to when my mum died, I was thinking about what could I have done to help her, what should I have done? And then I was also thinking about the exams that I needed to sit and needed to pass for my degree. But at the time, I couldn't concentrate on what I needed to study. I couldn't concentrate on the piece of paper in front of me. My mind was pulled here and pulled there. But if you can just kind of cordon it off into tight compartments and just think, what do I need to do in this day, in this hour, even in this minute to get me through? And it's almost like a really good sort of, I think, survival technique if you're dealing with something as traumatic as grief. But Dale's not saying that you shouldn't think about the past and you shouldn't think about future, because obviously you need to prepare for the future, but he's just saying try not to really worry about it and have anxiety over it. It's like, think about how many times you've fretted and worried about something and it actually hasn't happened. There's a great quote in the book by a French philosopher that says, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which have never happened." And that's so true. Think about all the time and energy that you've wasted on things that actually hasn't happened. Another reason why I like this book is there's loads of like little checklists at the end of the chapters. Are you dampening today by regretting what's happened in the past? And number 2, are you waking up determined to seize the day? And I really struggle with this because, you know, you get up, you go to work, you go to the gym or whatever, you have dinner, you go to sleep, get up and repeat. And the days can just blur into one and you don't really take time and take stock of what good things that maybe happened. You know, you're just kind of going on autopilot. And mentally recapping what was nice that happened that day has really helped me. And it can just be little things like, you know, I spoke to my grandma today, I'm really glad she's alive. And it's funny how those little things actually tally up if you just sort of take the time at night to think about them. It's made me sort of appreciate and just take stock of how many nice things can happen in a day that I take for granted. I don't know if you've seen the film About Time, but it's one of my favorite films, and the guy can time travel. And he's had a day that is a bit rubbish and he comes home to his wife and she's like, "How was your day?" And he's like, "Oh, it was crap, it was rubbish." He really hasn't really interacted or been very present that day, and he's kind of made it sort of miserable as well by his attitude to it. He repeats the day and interacts and is a bit more present. He realizes actually the day was actually pretty good. And I try and think about that whenever I'm just having a bit of a crap day. I try and think of that scene. It really helps me if things are going a bit shit. But yeah, it's hard to appreciate every single moment of every single day, and you definitely do take things for granted. But it's really helped me just recapping at night. I just feel like I get like a nice recap perspective of the day. Next is the magic formula to solve your worry problems. And there's an example of an engineer who's trying to remove the impurities in gas, but he invests a lot of money into a solution that actually backfires and costs the company a lot of money. So he's freaking out, and the book sort of goes into his thought process on how to get out of the situation. So initially the engineer was thinking, I'm gonna go to jail, I'm gonna get shot. And when he realised that isn't going to happen, the worst thing that is probably going to happen is he loses his job. And he could sort of accept that, you know, he was like, if I do lose my job, I can get another one. I can use all these things that I've learned for future lessons and for research going forward. So by accepting this, it kind of gave him the mental headspace and clarity to be able to proceed and try and solve the problem. Number 1, ask yourself what is the worst thing that can happen. Number 2, prepare to accept that if you have to. And number 3, Calmly prepare to try and solve the situation or improve the situation you're in. Next is don't let the Beetles get you down. And there's a quote in the book saying life is too short to be little. And what that quote means is life is too short to sometimes worry about those little worries. And there's a story in the book that talks about this huge tree that survived floods, lightning strikes, but it wasn't any of those natural things that actually destroyed the tree. It was an infestation of tiny little bugs that rotted the tree from the inside out. It's just trying to show that we can survive big things like diseases, bereavements in our family, and it's the little things that actually can break us. It could be like a comment that you've said to someone or a comment someone said to you that you think about over and over again that can just drive you mad. Next is a law that will outlaw all your worries. And there's a quote in the book that says, by the law of averages, it won't happen. That's because a lot of our worries are actually from our imagination and not our reality. I mean, think about all those times you've fretted and worried about something and it's not actually come to fruition and you've spent all that time and energy on it. It's like when my partner goes out for a run and he's like 20 minutes later than he says he's gonna be, and I'm convinced his legs are at right angles, he's down a ditch, and he's dead. He comes back in and he's just bumped into a friend and they've just been chatting, but you've just spent all that time thinking about something bad that's happened to him. So sometimes it's good just to think about, by the law of averages, is it actually going to happen? And that might just give you like a little peace of mind. So next is put a stop loss or cut off order on your worries. And this is essentially trying to get you to have a limit on the amount of time that you spend worrying about something. Example of this in the book is, say you've got a friend and you always like to meet them for coffee, but they're always late. By the time you eventually get to see them, you're kind of simmering because they do this to you a lot. And an example of this in the book is given a 15-minute time limit. So if she's later than 15 minutes, then you're just gonna go. And you're given 50 minutes to allow for like traffic or things like that, but you need a cutoff because your time's valuable too, and then you both know where you stand. So you could ask yourself these questions. Number one, how much does the thing I'm worrying about actually bother me? And number two, what is my stop loss or cut-off time for the thing that is worrying me? Next is 8 words that can transform your life. And this quote is by the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. It is, our life is what our thoughts make it. So Dale's not saying think happy thoughts and never worry about anything ever again. He's saying be concerned about the future and prepare for it, but just try not to anxiously worry and fret over it. So he gives an example of approaching high-speed traffic. We're not constantly fretting about the high-speed traffic as we're approaching it. We're concerned about it, but we take steps to avoid the danger. So we'll wait for the green man, we'll wait until it slows, but there's no point in us fretting and worrying about it because it's a waste of our energy. We're just trying to prepare for it. And there's a quote in the book that says, concern is realizing what the problems are and taking steps to meet them, and worrying is going around in futile circles. Next is the high cost of getting even. And this chapter is sort of saying that it can take us quite a lot of energy to get even. Maybe we should be using that energy instead to get better and to heal ourselves. We often, when we're trying to get even with someone and trying to hurt them, we can end up actually hurting ourselves more. And there's a quote in the book by President Lincoln, and it's, all of us are the children of conditions, of circumstance, of environment, of challenges, of acquired habits and heredity. This sort of hammered home the point to me that, if we're lashing out or we're being mean to someone, it's usually because we're triggered. We're usually triggered by something that's maybe happened in our past and we've not really processed it or dealt with. There's a quote that I really like, hurt people hurt people. I think if we could just sort of hold up a mirror to ourselves when we're acting out like that, or if the person who's being mean to us could hold up a mirror to themselves, it would actually reflect that there's something in them that is feeling insecure or something like that, and that's why they're acting in that way. Next is, would you take $1 million for what you have? So if I asked you, how much would you accept for your eyes? Or how much would you accept for your legs? You'd say nothing, they're priceless. And this chapter sort of goes on to say how we quite often don't appreciate the riches that we already possess. Because if you tallied up all the good, healthy things about you, or the things that are actually really good in your life and put a price tag on it, you would feel like the richest person in the world. But we quite often don't do that, and we're all guilty of thinking about what we lack, of what we want, and what we don't have. It can just make us actually feel really miserable. There was something that I heard someone say that really helped me, and it was, say you really loved this girl's hair, but to have her hair, you would also have to have her personality. You'd have to have her laugh. You'd have to have her job, her car, her family. And it quickly makes you think, actually, I quite like what I already do have. I don't think I want all the other bits that come with you. And it's quite a nice way to make you appreciate what you do have. And I really like this quote, count your blessings and not your troubles. Next is find yourself and be yourself. No one is quite like you. And this chapter talks about this singer who's singing in a club and she's got an amazing voice. She's really talented, but she also has like protruding teeth and she's quite shy and insecure about it. So she kind of sings like this. Guy who spots her and just says, look, okay, so you've got protruding teeth, but what if those teeth could make you a fortune one day? And then she starts embracing her teeth, singing really loudly. She gets discovered and she ends up being one of the main icons in that time. And this chapter is sort of about there's no one as miserable as the person who's trying to act or be somebody else. And I think especially in this day and age, you know, you go on Instagram and everyone's perfect and you see the highlight reel, when actually I resonate with people who are more real and authentic, who don't use the filters, who show me a bit of like real life. Next is if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Again, Dale's not trying to reinvent the wheel here. You know, how many times have we heard that phrase? But again, he's just trying to put things into action for us. The example in this chapter is a wife and a husband have to move to the desert because of the husband's job. And the wife is really reluctant. She really doesn't want to go. She gets there and hates it. She hates everything about it. She hates the heat, the dryness. She doesn't understand the language. She doesn't get on with the locals. She ends up writing to her dad and saying how miserable she is. And the dad writes back saying, two prisoners look out of their cell. One sees stars and the other sees mud. And she reads that and is a bit of ashamed of her behavior because she's not really given this new environment a chance and starts to improve the situation she's in. So she starts to learn the language of the locals and interacting with them. She starts to admire the stars and the nature and the beauty. She actually realizes that it was her mindset that was making the situation worse. After that, she actually really loves the desert and enjoys living there. And you can apply the lessons in this chapter to so many things. Like for example, I failed my driving test 4 times and I was honestly starting to think, maybe I'm just an idiot, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. But I then tried to flip it and think, okay, because I'm failing so many times, it means I get extra lessons. That means I'm gonna be a better driver. I mean, my parallel parking is very questionable at times, but I just tried to flip it and think about the good in this situation instead of focusing on the bad. Eventually, obviously, I did pass. I think sometimes it's just helpful to try and find the flip in the situation and find the positive, because there usually is some sort of positive in most situations. It's just about your mindset and how you sort of approach things. Next is how Dale's parents helped their worries, and they were really religious, so they often prayed. And Dale sort of says, praying can be a way of unloading and lightening your burden. Actually, saying things out loud can be a way of helping you figure it out. Also, by saying it out loud, you can actually kind of verbalize what is that is bothering you. Especially in Dale Carnegie's time, a lot of people probably didn't share their worries, especially if it was like health worries or personal things. So being able to sort of speak to God or spirit or universe or whatever it is could have been a helpful way to lighten their load at that time. Dale sort of says saying your prayers out loud and acknowledging what is wrong could be their way of setting the ball in motion to solving their worries. And that wraps up this week's video, so thank you so much for watching. Let me know your comments and thoughts. As always, I'll send someone a copy of this week's book if you comment below. This was the first self-development book I ever read. My best friend recommended it to me when I was getting quite down and anxious during lockdown. I found it was a really helpful, easy to read book, especially for my first ever self-development book. Because there were so many stories and anecdotes, it was just quite easy to digest. And I'm gonna give it 3.5 stars because there are some things that I didn't quite agree with and I thought were a bit outdated, like how to cure depression in 14 days. I thought that was kind of a bit of a blasé way to sort of treat mental health and any mental health issues. But I did find some of the things really interesting, like there was a lot of chat about the war and things like that. So yeah, overall I'd give it 3.5 stars. That's everything. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Take care. Bye. So another quote in the book. Are you just in there scoffing all the food? But she's so shy. And Dale starts off by saying that he's not written this book to reinvent the wheel, transform your life. And this quote is by the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And the story in this chapter is about a woman and a husband, and the husband, and after she reads that, she realized,